Hello and welcome to the season finale of the Unofficial Gilded Age Aftershow, where we are talking all things HBO's The Gilded Age. I am Kelsie Paw. I am the Director of Learning and Visitor Experience here at the Frick Pittsburgh, and I am joined yet again with a lovely bookend. We were here for episode 1, and we are here for episode 8. I am joined today by Dawn Breen, who is our Chief Curator and Director of Collections, and Bella Hanley, who is our Collections and Exhibitions Assistant. We have, as always, a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right in with our synopsis. Today we are talking about Season 3, Episode 8, our season finale, My Mind is Made Up, and our synopsis reads, George, his life hangs in the balance. Peggy reveals her truth to Dr. Kirkland, Marian struggles to move forward, and Bertha finally faces the fallout of her actions. We're going to talk about all of this and more, as always. Let's start, of course, where our big cliffhanger left us off from the previous episode. George Russell has been shot, and we open the episode with him careening down the street in a horse-drawn carriage, being brought back to the house. This is a perfect place to start because we had a question / comment from a viewer last week about this idea of where are they going to take George? Where do you go in an emergency? There's no emergency room department in the 1880s and 1890s. Are they going to take him to a hospital or not? Henry Clay Frick was not taken to a hospital. He was brought back here to Clayton. I think I mentioned that last week. And Dawn, there are some very good reasons why someone like George Russell is not going to want to go to a hospital for an injury like this. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Hospitals in the 1880s are not the hospitals that we know today. The study of medicine is still, in its infancy, especially surgery, and you had a greater chance of contracting a disease at a hospital rather than being cured. Many hospitals were charitable institutions or sanitariums, and so they were viewed as places, for the poor or incurable. So most people, especially very wealthy people like the Russells, would have preferred to see doctors in the privacy and the perceived safety of their own homes, even if they are laid up on the dining room table, as we see.
Which we see, right? We see that the Russells have a, personal physician who they call. There's a comment after the fact where Bertha's like, where were you? You didn't respond to our telegram or whatever they were sending. And so obviously, we'll talk about Dr. Kirkland in a minute. He is very fortunately right across the street, and Bannister's out having a cigarette or a cigar or something and happens to see everything happening and kind of rushes over, which again is very fortuitous. But we also got some comments last week from viewers who didn't know that this storyline is largely drawing from the historical reality of what happened to Henry Clay Frick, that he had this assassination attempt on his life. I gave the very brief Cliff Notes version of it at the end of the episode last week. Largely what happens to Frick comes out of a very contentious and what ends up being a violent labor dispute at the Homestead Steelworks here in Pittsburgh. Frick's decisions around how he's going to handle this labor dispute ends up leading to a clash between Pinkertons, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and the workers that leaves 10 people dead. Ultimately, that is what sort of inspires the attack on Frick by a self-proclaimed anarchist named Alexander Berkwin. And Bella, I know you have told this story many times, giving tours of our house of Clayton. So can you pick the story kind of back up for us there and talk a little bit about what happens when Frick gets brought back to Clayton and how that plays out?
Well, so I think there's a kind of an interesting split real quick with the show where Russell's very much treated at home. Frick is treated at the office, right? The doctors are kind of swarming the scene. He also has kind of a lucky, a doctor hears it on the street and rushes up. But then once they've treated him, so he's shot about 2 p.m. and they get him home around 7 or 8. He leaves the office. But very different from George Russell. Actually very similar. He has a tenuous family situation going on at home, but in a very different direction, where his wife is laid up with a newborn who is born prematurely, and neither of them are doing very well. And one of the big details that we share of Frick's story and his assassination story is that he's very clear from the get-go, don't tell my wife. She's got enough going on. Don't tell her. But then he's also much more public with it than Russell is. He gets home, he continues to be treated. They realize that not only has he been shot, he's been stabbed in the legs. I love the detail that they don't really notice that until they get home. They're like, oh boy, this is worse than we thought. You're not going to be back at the office on Monday. But I was kind of brushing up on some of our sources, the newspaper accounts, and there's all these details that he has visitors. He has lots of visitors coming to him. He's chatting about it. Again, very different, I think, than Russell. But yeah, that all hands on deck scene that you see on the dining room table with like Marian's gown getting all bloody is certainly not accurate to what was going on for Frick. Although maybe at the office, right? Everybody who's around.
Yeah, there's anecdotes that you'll see in the newspaper about, he gets shot in the shoulder and the bullet is in the shoulder and he sort of directs the physician to like where to go to dig it out. We'll talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit now, I guess, about the ways in which what this does for Frick sort of publicly, because one of the things that all three of us were really surprised by is that in the show, they make a big deal about the fact that they're not going to tell anybody and that it's this big secret. They're going to keep it under wraps, which feels incredibly unlikely and incredibly impossible within the context of who George Russell is within this society. There's a decent amount of witnesses that see him being pulled up to this. We were talking about the dead secretary. What's happening with him at the office? But in Frick's case, this is a highly public thing. And part of it is because it is part of this larger story of the Homestead Steel Strike, which was getting a lot of national press attention. So eyes were already on Pittsburgh, eyes were already on Frick. And this really just adds to the drama, but it's extensively covered in the press. And Dawn, you made the good point that maybe George Russell should want a little bit of that sympathetic press attention, because that's really what Frick gets. Like public perception of him was pretty negative following what happened at Homestead, and it really swings wildly in his favor once he's a victim now of this attack.
Yeah, Alexander Berkman, his act is intended to spark a workers' revolution. He really thinks he's doing it for them, but it backfires and it's viewed, as an act of terrorism by most people. And so the attempt on his life really shifts public sympathy away from the striking workers and toward Frick, and it just alienated their support. And that shift in public opinion ultimately contributed to the union's defeat and their position, where the union kind of disappeared in Pittsburgh for the next several decades.
Mm-hmm. And it's worth pointing out that Alexander Berkman has absolutely no ties to the community at Homestead. He's not a steelworker. He has no connections to the Amalgamated, the union. I mean, none of that. He really is, in a lot of ways, operating as a lone wolf. But, to your point, Dawn, his actions really, really do hurt the cause of what's happening in Homestead. And the union and the workers are quick to try to separate themselves from him in the press. But in a lot of ways, like, the damage is already done. It plays on a lot of fears that general Americans already had about the presence of anarchism and socialism within the labor movement. It has huge repercussions for how the strike ultimately plays out with a union defeat. To speak of that, we were all a little disappointed we didn't get more of the investigation. We don't know for sure. We end season 3 not knowing for sure who is to blame for this attack on George Russell. After things have sort of settled and we see that George has survived, he is recuperating in his bedroom. There's a very quick scene, blink and you miss it, scene where they're talking to this gentleman who they really don't introduce. They don't give a name. They don't really give a context. But those of us who sort of are looking for these things pretty quickly, I think all three of us were like, that guy a Pinkerton? Like, is he supposed to be a Pinkerton? And I will say I spent way too much time attempting to corroborate that, and I was successful. He is credited as a Pinkerton inspector in the credits, and so another really interesting sort of nod to the Frick story. Obviously, Frick had called in Pinkertons. That's what sparks the violence at Homestead several weeks prior to the assassination attempt, and we have seen Pinkertons on the Gilded Age before. All of us had forgotten the train derailment from season 1. But George had hired a Pinkerton to investigate that as well. And so that is what is happening. The Pinkertons are going to be investigating this. And Bella, we were talking about the fact that Clay is the obvious suspect here. We're all sort of, I think, led to believe in a little bit of a heavy-handed way that Clay is maybe responsible. But you were saying that you would almost like it not to be. It would be more interesting if it was not Clay.
I'm holding out hope because I think that's, it's the personal beef, it's the business drama, it's the very soap opera explanation for it. But it's the thing that he guesses and that he immediately puts out there. And I'm holding out hope that that's their like false flag. And actually what you just said about Alexander Berkman not really actually having any connection to the unions in Pittsburgh, like that kind of comes out of left field. That's not anything anybody was expecting. So I'm hopeful that they will take the historical precedent and kind of bring in a new social movement, introduce, there's a lot of different routes you could really go down with it.
For sure. And I think that George Russell, if we know anything, probably has a lot of enemies and has gotten on the wrong side of a lot of people. So I think that Clay is maybe at the top of the list, but certainly not the only person on the list.
The last in a long line.
Maybe. So yeah, I think, we know we're getting a season 4, so I think we'll probably pick up there. I hope it's not forgotten in the shuffle of the hiatus and that we will learn something there. But yeah, I think it would be a really interesting opportunity from a storytelling perspective to introduce that side of another movement that was very prominent in the Gilded Age. It was something that people were watching very closely. Let's talk about Dr. Kirkland, though, because he is the hero of the day, very fortunately. And he runs across the street and jumps in. And of course, at the end, we see that the Russells are very grateful and he is nicely compensated. We don't know what the number is on that check, but we are led to believe that it is very high. But Dawn, you mentioned that you were glad that they take a moment in that scene to acknowledge the personal and professional risk that William takes by agreeing to be involved with this. Because if something had gone wrong and George had died on that dining room table, Dr. Kirkland would really be on the hook for that in a very bad way.
We started this season of the Gilded Age with a white doctor refusing to treat Peggy for her pneumonia, and I just really appreciated the balance of ending the season with George's life being saved by a black doctor. And Dr. Kirkland took on an enormous risk operating on George. If that surgery had been unsuccessful, if something happened, if he developed an infection, for such a prominent public figure, Dr. Kirkland would have been blamed. The public would have been really eager to persecute him as a black man and to lay blame at his feet. So I appreciated that George thanked him for that. And I hope that check was big.
A big
buy a rock for Peggy with that.
He does make that lovely joke that he's like, I don't think robber barons are going to be like beating down the door of my doctor's office, but I'm glad that they were grateful, which is the right thing to do, because he absolutely, there are multiple points where they're like, if he had not been there, there's no way that he would have survived that. So he is the hero of the day. And of course, let's stay with Dr. Kirkland and talk about his other storyline in this episode, which is a bit of an emotional roller coaster from start to finish with Peggy. We pick back up finding out that they actually never had an opportunity to have their conversation that he had gone there for in the first place. And so some time has passed before he finally makes his way over to her parents' house to actually have the conversation, which we see very quickly doesn't go as well. It's absolutely heartbreaking how giddy she is because she thinks maybe he's going to propose. And then he comes and he's like, I'm going to talk to you about this. And it very quickly, goes sideways to the point that we think that potentially the relationship is going to be over. And of course, that is what gets us the incredible scene that I think so many of us as viewers were waiting for, which was an opportunity for Dorothy to finally tell Mrs. Kirkland exactly what she thinks about her and the way that she treats people. And Dawn, I loved it because you said that she got a dressing down, which is a very appropriate term for a scene that happens in a dressmaking shop.
Oh, I didn't even think about that, but I love it. It is the read of this season. I love it. She is quoting scripture to this pastor's wife and just putting her in her place. Like, such a delicious scene from two very talented actresses, and such a testament to Felicia Rashad's skill because she was so truly unlikable this season. And I was so thrilled to have Dorothy just take her down.
Yeah, it was a long time coming. I feel like Dorothy has bitten her tongue for most. She's been communicating with her eyes with a lot of like shade and side eye this whole season, and finally she got to just sort of lay into her. And of course, it's not only coming from Dorothy. We then see it coming from Mr. Kirkland, who has we talked with Alana last week. He's kind of largely been MIA. We meet him kind of at the beginning of the season, and then don't see him much in the middle. But he shows back up, of course, to go to this ball. And I just about died when he just said woman, like just in that scene of just, and she stops in her tracks, like she can't believe that he's, speaking to her that way. But I was listening to it again this morning, and he makes the comment of like, this is not the first time that you have done this. Like, you meddle in this way, you talk to people this way, and like it has to stop. Like, it's not okay. And so we get this really beautiful scene between, father and son, obviously. And it all comes down to the like what might be the most, I don't know about you guys, might be the most like romantic, beautiful scene I've ever seen in a period drama of him coming into this ball. It is truly like Cinderella. I can't handle it. And she gets her very beautiful proposal. But I was listening to something that we talked about this last season, Dawn, I think. Public proposals like that, not quite on brand for the Gilded Age.
No, probably unlikely to have ever happened in that way in the 1880s, but it didn't take away my enjoyment of it. Like the slow motion of it all, the fairy tale aspect, she looks so beautiful, that dress. I mean, it was really incredible.
Yes.
I'm not a fan of public proposals. I think I made that clear. We talked about them before, but I really loved this one.
For the record, Dr. Kirkland did it right because he knew he was going to get, he was pretty confident he was going to get a yes. Dashiell's misstep was that he had from season 2. Of course, as Agnes does point out earlier in the episode, you don't just marry a person, you marry their family. So Peggy is definitely going to have quite the mother-in-law on her hands. So I'm sure that this is not the end of Mrs. Kirkland's meddling. Maybe she has learned her lesson a little bit, but I am sure that there's going to be more to that. But for now, we will just bask in the happiness of Peggy Scott because it is rarely does she get that, certainly on this show up until this point. So it is much deserved. Let's talk about another happy couple who has become the kind of dark horse happy couple, which is Gladys and Hector. Let's talk about them real quick. They are just the picture of cuteness in this episode in a way that I think none of us saw coming, but I think we're all delighted by because it could have gone quite the other way. They, of course, we see them make their transatlantic journey up to Newport to go to this ball. And Ton, you were saying you have a little bit of a bone to pick with the show. And our portrayal of time, because we're playing it a little fast and loose with how long it actually takes to get things. Can you talk to us about what a transatlantic trip like this would actually entail during this time period? Not so quick as we make it seem.
We had to suspend disbelief a little bit for this storyline. I love fast and loose. That's exactly how I would describe it. We see that Hector and Gladys are traveling on the Britannic. And I saw a lot of chatter online that, the Britannic is later. It's the sister ship of the Titanic. But there were actually several iterations of the Britannic. And this is probably the one that's built in 1874. One of the most famous, one of the largest, most modern and fastest ships. Makes transatlantic travel significantly faster, especially for those in steerage. But the crossing generally still would have taken about 6 to 8 days, depending on the wind and the weather conditions. It feels like Bertha just left and came for like a long weekend or something. But I don't get the sense that a full week has actually passed since George was shot. Like, they try to set up this exposition of like, I'm so glad we got that telegram in Southampton. station on our way out. But it's still, the timeline just wasn't driving with me. And I needed to let that go and just stay wrapped up in the story.
Hollywood is notorious that time is but a construct in a drama like this. But worth pointing out that would have been much just a longer journey and a longer investment than what we're seeing on the show, of course. But she does make it. They are sort of co-hosting the ball in a lot of ways with Bertha, because we're not really sure that George is going to make it. He eventually does, and then of course we end the season with another kind of lovely plot twist, which is that Gladys is pregnant and she's thrilled, which is really lovely considering where she was 4 episodes prior, crying walking down the aisle. So that's come a long way. But of course she misses the opportunity to even tell her father that, because he has stormed out at this point. And he fooled all of us. We all thought that this brush with death was going to bring him and Bertha back together, and it seems that's the case for Bertha. It is not the case for George. And Dawn, you were talking about, the fact that really George is, he's being a little bit of a man baby about a lot of this. Some of it is valid, some of it is man baby behavior. But he's also being a little bit of a hypocrite here, which is that, he is willing to use Bertha when it suits him and her ruthlessness when it suits him. But he really holds it against her when she does the same. And that's really what I think we're seeing here.
Yeah, he had no qualms kind of using her ball and keeping up family appearances for his own ends. Like, that was all to, make good on the business deal and to not give any, speculation to the fact that he was shot. They're trying to keep that out of it. He makes a point of saying he's ruthless in business and not with the people he loves. And I get that. A near-death experience is going to inspire some self-reflection for anyone, but he just got shot, probably for being ruthless in business. So, if you're going to look at your life, look at your choices, you got to do it from all sides. That's the problem that I have with George.
Yeah. Look in the mirror, dude. Look in the mirror before we start throwing out accusations. And, Bella, we talk a lot about this in the context of our tours of Clayton, right? Because it's so easy. I've been thinking about this since yesterday. It's so easy for us to look backward at men like Henry Clay Frick or men like Andrew Carnegie or a fictional George Russell, right? And we look at them for all their success and the things that they left behind, and put them on a pedestal in some ways, right? And part of that we admire them for is that ruthlessness, right? It's often identified at what potentially makes them so successful, is that they're willing to go to any lengths. But where is the line between sort of ruthlessness as a positive, admirable trait and a ruthlessness as a negative trait that should be villainized? And this is something that's really at the crux of a lot of these industrialists' legacies. And that's kind of what makes it complicated. That's something that we talk a lot about on our tours.
It is complicated, and people are complicated, of course, but you see that big split as a very gendered dynamic in a lot of ways with George and Bertha, where his ruthlessness is celebrated, hers in the domestic sphere is a bad thing. But also this idea of separating the business world from the domestic sphere, I think, is something that has been done for a long time, and it is one way of looking at things. But George from season 1 has a man's blood on his hands, right? We see a business deal in which somebody gets the short end of the stick. They take their life. We see the fallout in that family of his wife being devastated, right? Where you're still playing with somebody else's loved ones, even when it's got this business context. But guys like Russell and guys like Frick, I think we think of them exclusively in the business sphere. We think of that as a very separate realm from a lot of other things. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really interesting the way they define that as being its own world, and as being a world in which that is accepted and is admirable.
I completely forgot about that plot point from season 1. There's a lot of things that are coming back up for us.
Oh yeah,
in this episode. No, it's a good point, and it's laid out really beautifully in the dialogue between Bertha and George as he's leaving, because he says, we share that ruthlessness. That's part of what brings us together, that we are both ruthless. But I'm ruthless in business, and I never am ruthless with the people that I love. And of course, Bertha's retort is that she's ruthless for the people that she loves. That's how she sees it. But Dawn, I mean, you were saying that like ultimately this comes back down to Gladys, right? Like this is coming down to the fact that he cannot let go of the fact that Bertha went around him. Like in terms of negotiating this marriage, she had already sealed the deal before ever bringing George into the conversation, which was kind of his traditional right as a father and as the man of the house. And I think that's like the root of the problem. Like that is what he can't let go of.
Oh, I think he got his feelings hurt. Like going back to that episode when she's, I don't know, he says something about when are you going to involve me in these conversations? And she's like, when you give me a seat at the boardroom. And I think he has had just a stick up his butt ever since that moment. He's had like a bone to pick with her, and it's just slowly coming out. And I think he's mad at himself. I think he wishes he had done more for Gladys, but I feel like he's really taking it out on Bertha, and ironically doesn't get to see the kind of joy that Gladys seems to experience in sharing the news that she's expecting.
Yeah, it's like I think Bertha got lucky that she was right, right? Like it's like Bertha got very lucky that this marriage has actually turned out to work out. But clearly, like even I think there's even that comment when they're at the ball, like Bertha says, like, look, she is happy, like they are happy together. And George just kind of, is like, yeah, but like it could have gone a very different way. Like clearly that is not enough to assuage kind of the anger and the resentment that he has about how it went, which of course leads us to this very dramatic shot of her leaning out the window watching him ride away. We'll see how it plays out. Maybe they'll find their way back to each other in season 4. But as we've talked a lot about this season, divorce has been very much on the table, and we had sort of predicted that they might go this way simply because of the fact that the Russells are so closely based off of the Vanderbilts, and Alva Vanderbilt and William K. Vanderbilt did end up getting divorced. Bella, you made the point that good thing she started inviting divorced ladies to her parties because that's where she's maybe headed.
It sure seems like it. And I loved when I said that, you were like, oh, it's almost like it was written that way. Which, yeah, they set her up real well there. But I mean, if they get divorced, her social standing is going to change in a big way. I caught myself hoping a little bit throughout the episode that he would die because I wanted to see how that would affect what she would do with that. But I think this will be interesting enough to see just how she kind of maintains her power that she is really staked out for herself if there's no husband in the picture.
Absolutely. And I mean, we haven't talked about it a ton, but, of course, the attitudes towards divorce do change. And the further we get into the 20th century, that is certainly going to be the case. I think we've talked a little bit about, Alva Vanderbilt herself really is one of the reasons that starts to happen. She's such a dominant persona in society at that point that once she gets divorced, it's like, well, if Alva's divorced, I guess it's okay. But I was listening to the official podcast, and they were talking about that Caroline Astor eventually does sort of have a change of heart, largely due to her daughter Charlotte and the fact that she gets divorced, and it kind of plays out similarly to what we see in the show. But Dawn, we were talking about sort of the legal side of this, which is, as we have seen a lot in this episode or in this season, divorce is really the only legal standing in New York, or the adultery is really the only legal standing in New York for divorce. And we were doing a little digging to find out when that changed, and it is surprisingly recent since that has changed.
The first law is enacted in 1787, and it does not change until 1963. And that is when the law is reformed to allow for some other fault-based grounds. I think abandonment and cruelty are among them, but no-fault divorce doesn't arrive in New York until 2010. So almost 2 centuries of stigmatization for women experiencing divorce in the state of New York.
That will boggle the mind when you think about that a little bit. That is the slow progression of history, as we'll say. But a reminder of like why these stakes are so high for these women, right? That like it comes down to the letter of the law of what their options are. And so we'll see how that happens. If this is the route that we're going to go down with George and Bertha, there are going to be limited options, and it's really going to come down to charges of adultery. We have speculated in earlier episodes that, we've seen Bertha flirt with a few men outside of her marriage, most notably Alfred Merrick at that very awkward dinner with George. So is that going to become the basis of what George uses to divorce her? Maybe. But we'll have to wait until season 4 to see how that plays out. I want to talk really quickly about Ada and Agnes because they have some very fun stuff in quick scenes. They're not a huge part of this episode, but they have some great stuff when they are on screen. So let's start with Ada, or no, let's start with Agnes a little bit, because Agnes finally finds out what it is that Mrs. Foster has been hounding her about, and she sort of has this heartbreaking moment where she admits that she can't donate anything, and then it's like, no, that's not what we're asking for. New York Heritage Society is not really a new thing, but the New York Historical Society is, and we find out that Agnes is going to be the vice president of this society. And Bella, you were saying Agnes is a history nerd at heart, and now she's got a job. She's basically one of us, which is delightful.
This moment was, a win for the history girlies. But I really love that because historical societies and museums in America have very often been the work of wealthy women. I think about our own art museum and our own legacy of Henry's daughter, Helen, really starting this museum and taking that work upon herself to preserve her own family's legacy, which is also how Agnes is getting into it here, right? Her own lineage is kind of putting her up here. But I love this moment. I think it's going to be a good thing for her to be a working woman. And you know what? She actually also admits that she's wrong right after they have this conversation where she's like, well, I'm never wrong. I wouldn't have to admit it. She admits it in that conversation. She says to the woman from the society, like, oh, I thought you were after my money. I apologize. Yeah, I was like, good for her. Just all around good for her.
There's some character growth. Her and Oscar both have jobs now, which is great for them. They've come a long way since season 1. But of course, then this leads to this next part with Ada, which is, Agnes, I think, finally feels like she has a purpose again. Like that's really been what has been at the crux of this conflict between Ada and Agnes, is Agnes feeling like she has lost her purpose as the lady of a house and somebody who runs her own finances. And so she invites Ada and tells Ada that it's her time to take the seat at the head of the table. And Dawn, you were saying that it does not take much for Ada to feel like she has had the best day of her life. Like she will take anything that she is given, and it is very sweet.
Yeah, Cynthia Nixon's delivery of that, like, really? She's just truly so genuinely grateful. But we've seen this dynamic, this power struggle playing out between the two sisters for the entire season. So that was a very heartwarming spot to end it on.
Yeah. Let's keep it in the Van Ryn Forte household quickly to just talk about sort of two things that are kind of running through the background of this episode with so many things going on. First, Jack and Bridget, get out of here. Like, so cute. First of all, him coming back and visiting everybody is the sweetest. And, they're still his family. And that's what Ada told him, was that he could come back anytime and spend time with them. And of course, like, I think we've seen this little bubbling crush that Bridget has had, like, throughout the season. I don't know that Jack was picking up on it the whole time. He was being a little bit aloof about it. But she very clearly in this episode is like, how young are these maids that are coming and cleaning your house? Like, who are these women? But the dinner scene of them in his new house is just the sweetest, cutest thing. And I love it so much for them because I worry about Jack in that house by himself.
So lonely, like seeing her there and him saying, like, you're not a servant here, like, sit down. And when he says that he feels safe with her there, I might have gotten a little bit teary. Like, that was so sweet.
Yeah. It's very sweet because we talked about this, like that would be, you just said it, like a very lonely and alienating experience. This isn't, it's not something that would have happened a lot in real life, but the way that it's been written in the show, like he doesn't have a network to be able to rely on. That his only network are the people that work in that house. And so you would have to imagine that how alienating it would be and how just sort of feeling like you're just sort of adrift without, kind of a touch point to things. So I love that Bridget, is maybe going to be that person for him. And I love that as another potential love interest, a love story to run through the background of the show. The other one, of course, is Marian and Larry, who are still a little bit in limbo when we leave them. There's some trust issues that are happening with Larry and Mary. But Bella, I think, you were saying that by the end of it, like, it seems like there's hope. I think we can go into season 4 hoping that they will finally find their way back to each other.
Yeah, I love that they ended it on a note of like, I like you and I don't know if I'm ready. Because I think that's been the problem for so many people. I mean, it's this whole idea that you have to get married right away at this point in time. Not necessarily right away, but that's you're on a pretty clear path. And I kind of love that they're taking their time. And I hope we get to see more of that. We were all talking about how it kind of seems like we're like, oh, and then they kissed. Oh, and now they're getting married. So we'd love to see more of their like courtship because he's got the means to do it right.
Yes. He's got so much potential. Larry. He just needs to grow up a little bit. I think, I appreciated that conversation back and forth between them where they kind of both own the mistakes that they have made in a way. They're not totally blaming one or the other. They're saying like, hey, we both had something to do with this, but we do care about each other. So let's see where this goes. So hope for #Larian in season 4. But we're going to end with a delightfully unexpected duo, which came out of nowhere in this episode, but in the best way, which is that we have this honestly, not even really unlikely, just sort of haven't seen it in a while, pairing between Turner, Mrs. Winterton, and Oscar. First of all, Oscar is back on season 1, Oscar just nonsense in a big way. Like this was quintessential season 1 Oscar that we were seeing here. He sees an opportunity and he goes for it, which is, Mrs. Winterton Turner is recently widowed. She now is extremely wealthy, and they know each other. They understand each other in a way that few people, I think, understand either of them. And so he kind of proposes this almost business-like deal between the two of them for this relationship. We get to see them kind of come together and say like we'll kind of maybe see how this goes. They've each got a cottage, and Dawn, you pointed out they've got a really great thing that's going to work out pretty nicely for both of them.
He's been scheming for this kind of arrangement since season 1. So I think he just might be able to secure this marriage of convenience, where they both have their own summer homes. They both go their own separate ways, don't ask any questions, don't make any visits to the other person's house. I feel like you called it, Kelsie. I feel like you said back in the episode when Mrs. Winterton mentioned that her husband wasn't well, I feel like you saw the storyline playing out. And so he just might have gotten it.
I just think it was just like, you don't mention an old man being unwell randomly in an episode if you're not laying the seeds for like, this man is going to die very quickly. R.I.P. Mr. Winterton. But I think it's also worth pointing out that obviously Oscar, because he is a closeted gay man, he came as close as he'll ever probably come to coming out to his family in the last episode. He has certain things that he's looking for in a relationship. But Turner has that line where she says, like, you're the only person here who knows the truth about me too. That knows that I, came out of domestic service. I mean, Bertha knows, obviously, and the Russells know, but, and so in a way, like, they just can be themselves with each other that they like can't be with other people. But I personally am very ready to watch like just this perfectly maniacal duo just wreak all sorts of havoc on season 4. I don't know what that's gonna look like, but it's gonna be delicious and I can't wait. I hope it's Oscar in more tiny sunglasses. Dawn, I know you're a big fan of his sunglasses.
Love those sunglasses. So good.
So good. That's going to be a very fun relationship for us to explore. And We're going to end on Oscar a little bit further because we had a very fun, not necessarily a viewer question, but we've seen sort of some commentary that's been happening out there on the internet that we thought was very interesting and very fun, which is regarding Oscar and his lounging. Oscar spends a lot of season 3 draped dramatically on a sofa, oftentimes with pumpkin, which is a really fun sort of detail to add in there. Honestly, more pumpkin, please. We could all use a little bit more pumpkin in the Gilded Age. But people were sort of commenting that it would be so out of character and would not be appropriate for a man like Oscar to be draped in such a way, even in his own home. But Don, you were pointing out that that is not necessarily the case, and that there's actually kind of an interesting evolution when it comes to being comfy in the Gilded Age.
Yeah, I think every aspect of Gilded Age society seems so rigid in every regard. I mean, sitting itself is even regulated by some very specific rules of, body control and deportment. But I think once you're in the privacy of your own home, a little bit more was forgiven. And so we start to see the beginning of a culture of comfort in the mid and late 19th century. You have new technologies coming about that are leading to spring seat upholstery and a kind of increasing focus on bodily comfort. I think etiquette would still kind of demand that lounging was evidence of extremely bad manners. I read one etiquette book that cautioned men against lounging or tipping back on their chairs. Tell that to my nephews. Throwing your leg over your knee or sitting in any unnatural position as habits that are considered indecorous when ladies are present. Extremely vulgar. But I think when he is at home, it's definitely much more appropriate to see him draped over the sofa and feeling a little more comfortable. I would have been worried if he went to see Bertha and was like lounging like that on her sofa. That definitely would have been kind of out of character for the 19th century. But more lounging, more Oscar, and more pumpkin, I think we can all agree on.
Yes. Let's start the petition right now. More of that. Listen, Oscar went through it on this season. He deserves to be able to drape himself dramatically across a couch if he wants to. But he ends in a pretty good place. So we'll see where things go. Of course, that's where we end. That's where we end season 3. We'll have to wait however long HBO makes us wait to find out where some of these storylines are going to pick up. Good news is they've already renewed it, so we know that more is coming. And of course, that brings us to the end of our season 3 of the Unofficial Gilded Age Aftershow. So thank you so much to everybody who has joined us every week to watch on YouTube. We have a ton of fun doing this, and so we hope that you enjoy watching. An extra big thanks to our special guests this season, to Brian Centrone and Lauren Henry and Alana Carter Donaldson. And of course, thank you to all of my wonderful colleagues who chatted with me, including Bella and Dawn today, taking time to chat about our season finale. I will just leave it with saying that the season may be over, but if you need something to tide yourself over while you're waiting for season 4, it's always the Gilded Age over here at the Frick Pittsburgh. So if you're in the area, come by and see us take a tour of our award-winning tour of Clayton, where you will hear all about Henry Clay Frick's brush with death and a lot more than that. And don't forget, we do have a bonus episode floating out there, talking fashion, that will come out in a little bit, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But until then, thank you so much for watching the Unofficial Gilded Age After Show, and we will see you next season.